This is the Surly Grognards for February 16th, 2015. This is Peter Bowman, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Eric Carlson. How are you doing tonight, Eric?
I'm doing all right.
Excellent! So, this week we got an email from a viewer, and inspired me, it sort of gave me an idea for a show topic. So it wasn't posted as it was posted as a viewer question, and it sort of got my gears grinding, as it were. So this is from Matt, who says, "Hey guys, I noticed you have been short on questions lately." This is true.
Yeah.
My last game of Iron Kingdoms fell through, and hopefully my group and I will be starting a new campaign on Roll20 soon. I got to look at Roll20 at some point. Speaking of that, just because one of those things. I like map tools, but I should take a look at the other options. Anywho, back to the email. Now, I had an insane idea a few weeks ago, inspired by how Warhammer 40k and Warhammer Fantasy in very early editions were kind of the same continuity, and how now Keldor Drago is now running around in end times.
Fuck that noise. I do not need the friggin' Mary Sue Grey Lord, or not Grey Lord, Grey Knight Go-Go running around beating up Skaven.
I essentially want to mix 40k and Iron Kingdoms, and I have no idea, mechanically, how to make it work. The campaign setting is that a space Hulk crashes in the middle of nowhere and everyone wants to claim it. Your group is sent in to explore and clear the Hulk. Now, the reason I need your help is that I need the blend to be seamless. I need some way to convert the D100 system for enemies in combat to the D6 because I don't want the players to know it's 40k. I want them to be blindsided, and besides describing 40k with the limited context of Iron Kingdoms just sounds hilarious. Also, the concept of warcasters rolling the perils of the warp table and the thought of driving them all slowly to the point of insanity with whispers of chaos sounds too good to pass up. Any thoughts on the matter?
Okay. You are dealing with two entirely different systems, with entirely different ways of measuring things.
Yes. So the concept that popped in my mind is, how do you convert stuff from one game system to another? Because it's something that I think, it's one of those things that I think every long-running game master eventually does.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I've converted plenty of characters from one edition to the next, which, in the case of old FASA games, might as well be entirely different games.
Yeah, that's definitively true. Looking at you, MechWarrior 1st to 2nd to 3rd to 4th edition to 5th. That's not on 5th yet, but yeah.
Yeah.
Or even
looking
just
at you, Shadowrun
2nd to 3rd to 4th.
Yeah.
4th to 5th is basically the same, though.
Yeah, 4th and 5th, they finally found a good groove with Shadowrun, but it took them till friggin' 3rd or 4th edition.
Well, with the 4th edition and to be keeping things the same, it took them to be not FASA.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know people who argue back and forth on whether they prefer 3rd or 4th, and that's a valid argument, which we're not going to get into today. Most because it'd be entirely on Eric's side, because I don't play Shadowrun.
Right.
I have played it, but I don't play it. You know what I mean?
I grok.
Yes. I love that term.
It's a good term.
Thank you.
From Heinlein, of all
yes.
people.
Stranger in a Strange Land. Great but fucked up book.
Yes.
Not his most fucked up book, but it's way up on the list.
Well, the subtext in friggin', and the text of friggin', what is it? Starship Troopers. Love that book, but that is the biggest endorsement of fascism I've ever seen.
The really funny thing about that is it's actually in many ways a sort of a critique of it, too.
Yes.
Because Highlander's a fucking brilliant writer. Let's just put that way.
Yes, absolutely.
I think a large part of it is that, you look at, before we get to the topic at hand, because I have to talk about this, the dichotomy between the sort of ethos of Starship Troopers and the ethos of Stranger in a Strange Land, and you realize they're the same fucking author.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that shows a lot. That shows a lot of the skill of the author, and I really like Heinlein, but sometimes he makes me want to punch things. Of course, so does Lovecraft. So, really like Lovecraft, but the man was a raging racist.
Yeah. Well, yeah, product of his time,
and completely batshit insane.
Yes,
but I think it had to do with the fact that he pretty much just lived in an apartment with his two spinster aunts and never encountered other human beings.
Anywho, back to the topic at hand, though. Converting. All right, so yeah, Eric is right. So back to your thing. The from what you're saying, the mechanics, and from what Matt says, the mechanics between these two games are pretty much what I can tell, almost entirely wholly incompatible.
Right. So what the next trick is to try to get the feel of what you're converting over.
And that's actually the main thing you have to do in almost any conversion. Is that's the first thing, because when you're converting between systems, it's getting things exactly right mechanically is very hard. Unless you're, I mean, it's very, very hard to get that down right. And sometimes borderline impossible.
It's, say for example, take a Gene Stealer and try to convert it over to Iron Kingdoms.
All right.
It's
so Eric, roughly what does a Gene Stealer do in the Warhammer 40k role playing game?
Okay, the Gene Stealers in the Warhammer 40k universe are aliens that can exist in vacuum, and their whole point about how they reproduce is they infect other species with their gene plas, and they start producing hybrids, which eventually become pure string Gene Stealers again and starts the cycle over again.
Right.
There's a whole lot of like mind control and weirdness involved.
Right.
But let's stick with pure string Gene Stealers, which are giant atavistic chitinous monstrosities with 4 limbs that can tear through steel.
All right. So they're tough, they're fast, and they're horribly beclawed and can attack a lot in melee.
Yes, and are terrifying.
Right. So
not just because of what they can do, because they've got like these sort of weirdly human faces that are kind of creepy on the giant bug bodies. Gene Stealers are really cool, and totally not a reference to Geiger. Not in the least.
Nope, not at all. Totally not. Nope. Totally
a wholly original creation
by Games Workshop. And the Space Marines were not at all influenced by Starship Troopers, the book. Nope, not at all.
Not in the least.
And if you believe that, we have a bridge to sell you. Or 3. So, honestly, that's not that hard to do. Like, a G-Stealer really isn't that hard to do in Iron Kingdoms, to be perfectly honest.
No, not really. I'd probably give them vitality instead of a life spiral, because they usually come on in, like, hordes.
Yeah. So you give them a good chunk of vitality. You know, they probably have pretty good defense and toughness. And armor,
I'd probably give them, like, 14-14 for defensive stats.
Something along those lines.
Like scary motherfuckers.
And then, you give them a very strong mat, multiple attacks, and good, power plus strength in the attacks, and the terror ability, and any other things that you think, any other basic abilities that you think fit the fluff for them. I mean, because there are a bunch of them. For
straight combat, I'd probably give them a really high sneak and maybe prowl.
Yep.
But all of their really truly terrifying shit isn't going to come up in a fight. In
a fight, right? And you don't need to do you don't need to worry about that mechanically per se. I mean, you can come up with some mechanic for it on your own, but that's the mind control thing. There's their mind control spells, their mind control spells in Iron Kingdoms.
Yeah, and I probably wouldn't even deal with the mind control thing unless you're dealing with like the Magus is the Psyker hybrid.
Right, and that might come up in combat.
Yeah.
And
in which case, you just build them like a friggin' Arcanist with extra toughness.
Right. There's all sorts of things like that. I mean, it's pretty easy to do that. And then you've got the, and on top of that, you give them the. They probably have like 2-weapon fighting effectively, and
well, seeing as they have 4 arms, I might give them 4 attacks.
Well, yeah, you end up giving them effectively 4 attacks, basically.
Yeah.
Or what have you. I mean, it's really easy to get there.
These are scary motherfuckers. Let me just say, if you have to take these guys out at range in Iron Kingdoms.
Yeah, exactly. And
because even if they only have 5 vitality, if they touch you, you're going to be pasted.
Right, exactly. And it's easy enough to do that. I mean, you just have to look at the numbers and work out how deadly you want them to be for the players.
Yeah.
And that's a balancing act, that you'll have to walk the line on. And you look at it, it's basic just running your probability numbers. You look at the roughly what the players' defenses are like and how easily you want the Gene Stealers to hit them once they get there, and how easy it is for the players to hit them, and vice versa. It's a classic. I mean, you end up balancing it out, and they'll end up being terrifying things, and that's just the Gene Stealers.
Yeah.
But you can basically run this process for anything from 40K over to Iron Kingdoms, and any of the
Yeah, the more the wackier mechanical stuff, like the whole Perils of the Warp, that's another matter entirely.
Yeah, and you'll have to come up with something on your own for that, and it sounds like he probably has an idea of how to handle that. I mean,
my suggestion would probably be, after you cast a spell, include take all the dice, including any boosts involved.
Mm-hmm.
Roll them. If you come up with 2 or 3 ones, I'm not sure how scary you want it to be, roll on the Perils of the Warp. That way, the more power you're dumping into it, the more likely it's going to happen.
And there you go. And that's sort of the basic sort of, that's sort of a basic way to go about doing it. I mean, basically, you're going to have to basically focus on trying to get the feel of the 40K stuff, but just focus on using the mechanics that are provided to you by Iron Kingdoms and run with that.
Yeah.
Again, focus more on the feel rather than directly representing exactly the same things mechanically.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The whole rapid possession thing, there is nothing like that in 40K, but in Iron Kingdoms. But it might be something I'll just drop, because it's just sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like, boom, fuck you. Your character is dead, now there's a demon.
Right, and
that's never any fun.
No.
It's occasionally hilarious. It's never any fun.
So yeah, but that's sort of the basic way to handle this, and that's sort of, I think we're basically mostly, that's sort of, and Perils of the Warp, the Gene Stealers, which are the most likely thing you're going to run into on a wrecked Space Hulk.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering, you might run into some Hormigons too, which again, not that hard.
Yeah, they're just less scary Gene Stealers.
For the most part, yeah. And stuff like that. And you go from there, and if they don't clear out enough of them, eventually maybe a couple of Gene Stealers get away and find a small settlement and start taking it over.
And then you've got another whole campaign right there.
Exactly.
Man, that's scary.
Yes, it's very scary.
Oh, jeez. Gene Stealers get into the sewers and start a cult. But they end up having a gang war with the Cephalics down there.
That's exactly what I was thinking, is what happens when they
Oh
run
my
the
god,
Cephalics.
what a mess that would be. Oh my god, Gene Stealer drudges.
Yeah, the second you said sewers, like, oh dear, Cephalax. That's going to be ugly. Oh, and or Gene Stealers starting to muck about with Gatormen.
Yeah. Steeler Gatorman hybrids. That's scary.
Yeah?
I've got 3 arms and chitin on top of my scales.
What? No. And giant toothy maws, because
Gatormen.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, that, again, I hope that answers Matt's sort of immediate, direct mechanical thing, but I do want to talk more about just sort of conversions in general. And we've touched on the main goal of doing conversion work like this, which is you want to get the feel. The feel is the most important thing, as opposed to
actually getting the straight-up mechanical translations.
Yeah, a one-to-one mechanical sort of equivalency is going to be very hard to pull off, if not impossible.
Yeah.
So you really got to focus more on the feel, the look and feel. And again, the look is easy because you're the game master. You get to describe things as you see fit.
Yes.
But I mean, the whole notion of conversion is something that's been around in role-playing games since the 80s. I mean,
since ever.
Ever since
there are
games.
2 different systems.
Right, exactly. And I mean, there have been companies that have actually gotten started and done very well based on publishing books of stuff for rules on conversions between different systems. That's how Wizards of the Coast got started.
Mm.
And become a gaming juggernaut after that. Although that had nothing to do with that. That had to do with them making a deal with this mathematician named Richard Garfield, who had this idea for a clever little collectible card game called Magic the Gathering.
Boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
And that led to buckets and buckets and buckets of money for
led
WotC.
to all the money. All the money.
But yeah, originally, Wizards of the Coast, their main product was books on converting, things between like a bunch of different systems. And specifically, they published books of basically what one of their big things were books of sort of setting stuff and like characters and settings and such, and then they would include in those rules to actually establish them mechanically in a bunch of different systems.
Mm.
So you could buy this, and if you ran Palladium, if you were running a Palladium fantasy role playing game, you'd be able to use it. Or if someone else was using playing D&D, they could use it. Or if someone else was playing Hero System, they'd have rules for that too. Which is really clever. A great business, a really clever little thing. Apparently, Palladium Kevin Sambieta didn't like this and actually sued them over this at one point. Because that's what Kevin Sambieta does. Which makes no fucking sense, personally, but I
have to protect my IP, or it'll be un-IP-ish.
Yeah, sure, buddy. Because effectively, what the books allowed you to do is, since it had the okay, this is how you do this character in Palladium, this is how you do it in D&D, this is how you do it in this system. It effectively allowed you to translate anything from Palladium into another system once you actually had the books. And you're like, okay, well, this is how they do that, and I now know what the rough equivalencies between these two systems. And that's one of the major reasons these books were very popular.
Mm.
Is if there's a setting book in some game that you wanted to adapt to a different game, these books were very helpful for that. So it's something that it's been around a long time, and there have been a bunch of companies that have published a lot of different stuff for doing conversions between systems. And I know that, TSR, the original publishers of Dungeons & Dragons...
Back they still existed.
Right. They published a bunch of different games that were in a bunch of different settings, with similar rules, but that were fairly different. And so they often had sort of ways to they would publish like stuff in Dragon Magazine or what have you of how to convert monsters in D&D monsters to be usable in your Gamma World game or in your Star Frontiers game.
Mm.
Usually not to be used in your top secret game because because the odds of a dragon showing up in your spy game are kind of unlikely.
When did this become Shadowrun?
Yeah, kinda.
But yeah, and yeah, I mean, we've all converted our characters from one edition to another.
Yeah.
Or at least some of us have. I know I have.
Uh-huh.
With like just between different editions of D&D, which the early editions were pretty different. Like second to third, I don't even want to think about converting a third to fourth. I haven't had to do that yet.
Yeah, well, again, in all those, in all three of both those cases, going from second to third and third to fourth, or second to fourth for that matter, you really have to just go for I'm trying to capture the rough feel of the character. And sometimes it's going to be very difficult.
Absolutely.
Even capturing the feel for some of them, because some things work very differently between the editions. But because you have a different set of options and such, and that's one of those things that's again. The big things, like as an example, actually, of converting between third and fourth, for instance, there'll be times you're doing conversion of your character, and you realize, if you think about it, like, I'm converting this character over to this, and mechanically, like, in order to capture the way the character plays and like the skills they have or what have you, you realize that if you're paying attention, you really end up wanting to change classes. Because like this character, it doesn't represent the base class doesn't represent the way I want the way the character plays and acts in fourth ed the way it did in third. I mean. And a lot of people.
Yeah, we haven't played fifth yet, so we don't know.
Right. So a lot of people. I know a lot of people very early on in fourth edition got really hung up on the class names, and like, well, this character, I can't convert my character over. Well, what does your character do? It does X, Y, and Z. Well, you build that as class Y, but that's not the class he is. Yes, but the class that this class does what your character did in the other edition, but it's not the class This is not the class he is.
Which is immaterial to how you want him to play.
Right. That's the label. You bring him over and call you bring him over and call him that again. It's not a big deal. The label doesn't matter as much as how the character plays and what the character's personality is, and so on and so forth. And if the label matters, you just say, okay, yeah, I mean, I want, like, I forget the best example of that. I think it was was like someone who didn't like the way paladins in fourth ed played, and their paladin was more of a support character. So people said, well, just play him as a cleric. But he's a paladin.
A paladin.
So play him as a cleric who acts like a paladin.
But he's a paladin.
Yeah, and getting hung up on that sort of thing is one of those little...
Yeah, that's the death right there. Yeah.
And that's actually, as a general rule of thumb in doing conversions, if you're converting between two systems, labels are something you're going to have to basically fudge sometimes.
Or just check out the window.
Right. And, a lot of times, like, you've got, like, a great example is if you're converting an adventure from, like, like, if you're using a pre-published adventure, which people do from time to time, and some of them are very good. But let's say you're converting a module from some system over to D&D 4th edition, which is one I know. This is one of the sort of one of the big systems that I know pretty well. But like, you're converting it over, and the monsters, like, okay, so the goblins in this encounter do X, Y, and Z, but there are no goblins that do that in 4th edition. Well, are there monsters that do what you want? Well, yes, but they're not goblins. Well, remove the name, kobold.
Search replace whatever with goblin.
Right. Done. But this monster, it's not like, let's say it's like, I don't know, an elf that does, like an elf monster that does what he wants his goblin to do. And it's like, but, elves, so, okay, well, you call it a goblin and you make some minor stat tweaks to the elf stats to make it act like a goblin. So it's not quite as fast, and it's no longer a medium monster. It's a small monster, and you're done. But it's an elf, not anymore. You said it's a goblin. No,
now he's short, green with big ears and teeth.
And relabeling and refluffing things in any game will get you 75% of the way there with most conversion work, in my opinion. Entirely because, again, I've talked about this before, is the thing that you have to remember as the game master is, as I've said before, you are the player's eyes and ears. So when you describe stuff, that's what the player sees. So, if you say that this monster, is, 4 feet tall, is green with pointy ears, pointy teeth, and he pulls out a bow and shoots you, and it does this stuff mechanically, the mechanical stuff doesn't matter as much. The players will know this is a goblin. It may mechanically have been an elf at one point, but that doesn't matter anymore. And, this applies to, like, any sort of, translation work. I mean, and sometimes you're not going to be changing the flavor of things. Like, you're going to be bringing a monster from something like, and no, I shouldn't say monster, an adversary, an entity. Well, specifically, I'm going for stuff that is, like, combat specific. So we're not, like, adversary. An adversary of some sort over from an antagonist adversary type from one system. Like, let's say you're running a sci-fi game and you want to throw some D&D monsters at the players just for a change of pace. I know that you've talked about, I think it was in the Farscape game you were playing in, that our friend who's running it brought over trolls, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And so, you basically, and since both of them are D20 games, it works roughly appropriately. And you just, all of a sudden you're describing this monster, and the players are all going, this sounds familiar, but I can't put my fingers on it. And then it starts doing things, you're like, oh god, it's a troll. How do I handle this in a sci-fi game? Because that's a very different kettle of fish.
Yes. Guess, who's it down with plasma? Actually, if I remember correctly, we just shot it till it stopped moving and left. We had to backtrack, and it got and had discovered it left. It had gotten back up and left, and we're like, well, whatever, we'll just shoot it till it stops moving again.
Right. Right, and that's that sort of thing falls into the if it turned out that the Iron Kingdoms and the Warhammer 40K role-playing game had the same mechanics, which they don't, then bringing the Gene Stealers over would be easy, and it's sort of the same sort of effect we're talking about. But in this case, you're changing mechanics too. But yeah, converting adventures is one of those sort of tricky things. Just because things like, especially if you're translating between systems with very different mechanics, because you're going to have to do some adaptation of the NPCs, the things you end up fighting if you end up fighting stuff in the adventure, the appropriate skill rolls and difficulties for those skill rolls, skill checks, I should say.
Right. Yeah, they're getting the feels what's important, but there's also going to be a degree of math involved in figuring out the probabilities of just how scary is this going to be.
And that's the thing. One important thing, especially like skill check difficulties, understanding what the percentage chance of a particular results are is something that you're going to need to know to do conversions.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to know what what an outcome is on a D20 roll. Every point, a 15 or less is a 75% chance of success. It means it's 5% per point. D20 is a less granular D100. Instead of moving up in individual percent points, it's moving up in 5% points. But if you're converting something from, say, D&D over to Hero System because you want to run a Hero Fantasy game, and there's this great D&D adventure you want to run for your Hero Fantasy game, Hero System runs on a 3x6 bell curve system.
Right. Which is entirely different.
Right. So, something like, if you have a 75% chance of succeeding, something that's players are expected to have a 75% chance of succeeding. That means that adjusted after everything, they need to roll a 15 or less in D20. In Hero System, that means they're going to need to roll something between 12 and a 13 or less. It's somewhere in between there, because a 12 or less is roughly 72% and 13 is roughly 83%.
And bell curves really mess with people used to
right
to the more linear thing. Because don't remember who it was, but they were talking about it again. Iron Kingdoms. They're talking about how full plate sucks because you get all these penalties, but it's only one more armor on top of tailored plates. Like, yes, tailored plate's clearly superior but if you've got like a physique of 8 or 9 and you put on full plate, that extra point of armor makes you much, much tougher because of the bell curve.
Right, exactly.
That 1 point is really important.
That's the thing, is that because of the way bell curves work, the vast majority of the results are squished into the middle.
Yes.
And so you have these because
there's not a big difference between, say, 11 and 12, but 12 and 13.
Yeah, you're much. If you have to roll more than rolling more than a 12 and rolling more than a 13 is a noticeable difference.
Yeah.
Because you're losing much more significantly chunks of you're not losing after a certain. I mean, the biggest shift is moving from the midpoint to 1 point off either direction.
Right.
So you're moving off if you succeeding on a 10 or less and succeeding on an 11 or less is the biggest shift in the game.
Yes.
Actually, it's because that's those are sort of the straddling the point of exactly 50-50. In fact, it's 10 or less or 11 or greater is exactly 50%, 50-50 either way. Because I've done the math on this multiple times, and got into a debate with a mutual friend of ours one week at game for a Tuesday game about it. And he was saying, it's not 10 or less is not 50-50. It's not exactly. It's like, no, it is. I've done, and so while this is going, I proceeded to pull my laptop out and built a spreadsheet in it to actually do it. I'm like, yep, I was right. It's exactly 50-50. If you just take all the possible results. I mean, an easy way to know there's an easy way to figure it out, fudge it out, but I wanted to actually have sort of concrete proof of it.
Right.
But yeah, it's knowing the probabilities of whatever system you're using is actually really important. Is what sort of we're trying to get to.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to say to you.
Because then you can look at like, okay, in this system, you know, X, what were the players trying to attempt X, and if they need to make a die roll, and we know exactly what the odds of them, an average odds of a player character in this adventure of succeeding in this are, then you can easily look at, okay, what's the rough equivalent in the system I want to run this in, and then you just peg the difficulty there. Or if you want to even tailor even further to your players, you can tailor to what your players are likely to be able to pull off there. Because, you know, it's even better if you adapt the adventure to be tailored to your players so that it works properly for your player characters than, you know, than if it just running the... I would recommend doing that even if you were keeping the same system. Is like, okay, so the DCs of this is, you know, it's a DC 20 check for this skill in D&D in any like 3rd edition or 4th edition or what have you. All right, but my party doesn't have people who are that good at this, and so this will just end up being a roadblock. Well, I should probably lower the DC then,
or increase the DC so that because my party is filled with guys who are really good at this, so we should make it something of a challenge.
I want to make it a little. I want them to actually have to work at it. Or either that, or if they're ridiculously good at it, you can say, well, I'm not going to have them make a skill check. It's pointless.
Yeah.
They can roll the dice, but they're just going to succeed. Because they're just that... And fluff-wise, it's like, oh, well, they're just better than these people in this situation that they're up against in this particular area, so why bother having them roll? This is not a challenge for them.
Right.
So you find where somewhere else to introduce a little bit more challenge somewhere else. And this is the sort of thing you have to do. It's just in any conversion of an adventure. Is, you know, you're going to want to tailor.
Even if you're just taking like a pre-publish, it's a good idea to look at like what your characters are capable of and what they're expecting, or what the scenario is.
Right.
Like they're all a bunch of like alpha striking friggin' combat monsters. Then maybe you want to up the armor class of things or give it more hit points.
And maybe you don't. Maybe you want to just interject some other stuff later on in the adventure that might be more challenging.
Yeah, or maybe you just want to make the non-combat stuff that much more difficult to illustrate their weaknesses better.
Right. But the big thing is that, you know, you shouldn't expect to, you know, like if the party is big, or the player characters are all pretty much mostly combat monsters, and they're not really that interested, their characters aren't suited for it, and they're not particularly interested in, sort of hobnobbing and
spycraft.
Right, or, you know, doing a spy investigation. You don't want to throw a spy mission at them. A spy event, adventure that's built around, you know, spying on people and, you know, worming information out of people through conversation, all that stuff, because that's not an adventure that's well suited for that party. And it's one of the things you have to keep in mind anytime you're running a game.
Yes.
I mean, there are times when changing things up like that's a good thing, but you have to be sure that it's something the players will want to do also.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if the players are looking at this going, but I have no interest in doing X, why are you running it for them? Like, if the players are all really all psyched and hopped up for, you know, they're all about, like, you know, diplomacy and social interaction, all that sort of stuff, and aren't really that interested in sort of heavy combat. Throwing them into a dungeon crawl is not going to make them happy, and they're not going to have a good time, and you're not going to have as much of a good time either as a game master.
This is true.
So, as always, knowing what knowing the needs and wants.
Know your audience is what we're saying.
Yeah. It's the classic. It's communication stuff at its heart. You know, make sure you and the players are on the same page in general. I mean, we've talked about that incessantly on on the show.
Yeah,
I mean,
we rarely do we go a month without mentioning these little tips.
but yeah, that's sort of the basics for converting adventures. Is honestly the actual structure of the plot you're not going to have to change much, unless there's stuff in there that makes no sense for your campaign, but you're going to have to do that anyways. And the translating the stats and the effects of the NPCs and monsters, or baddies or what have you, and all that stuff. That's again focus on make sure you get the right feel and the right sort of rough probabilities, and just make sure you have a rough understanding of how probabilities work out. I mean, that's literally just some it's. Honestly, when doing this sort of conversion work, it really does help to have a basic understanding of how probability works. I mean, it's just, and not even like on a wide scale, but just knowing it on a
Yeah, just getting the feel of it is what's important.
Right, exactly.
You don't need to know. You don't need to have hard numbers and formula and all this other
Right.
stuff. As long as this feels about right for the party, then
Right, exactly. And worst case, you can just sit down and just look at the numbers and roll the dice a few times to get a feel for it and see if it feels right. You won't be completely accurate because you're not going to you will not get a large enough sample size to be pinpoint accurate just by sitting down and rolling dice, because you're not going to want to sit down and roll dice tens of thousands of times. And if you do feel like that, wow. So yeah, from there, I guess conversions of settings is sort of the next big thing to talk about, and that's that's actually simultaneously the easiest and the hardest thing to do. Like you want to take a setting from one system and plonk it, but you don't like the way that system runs. So like. Let's say you really love the Eberron world in Dungeons and Dragons. You think it's the bee's knees, but
Bees
you
have
hate
many knees.
right. But you hate the Dungeons and Dragons mechanically. Let's say that's the case, and let's say you absolutely adore. I don't know. Pick a system you can run a fantasy game in, Eric.
GURPS.
GURPS, sure. You adore GURPS fantasy. What do you do?
Weep and complain?
No, not really. Literally, you just sort of go, okay, well, it's going to be work, don't get me wrong. But, you look at it, okay, well, you basically just have to go through and do the translation of, again, you just sort of look at, okay, what gets across the look and feel of each element in Eberron in GURPS, and how do I, recreate that? Now, you have a big advantage in this, in that Eric has chosen GURPS, which, as a universal system, means that there are a lot of things that are easy. It makes it fairly easy to translate across. It'll take some time and effort to do it.
Right. There's probably even a fairly simple conversion system out there for it, because...
Oh, God, yeah, there are.
GURPS and Eberron, yeah.
Well, not GURPS and Eberron, but GURPS and Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
There have been a bunch of them over the years. I know there was a published in one of the Pyramid magazines, which was a periodical that CJ Games published for their game systems.
Oh, way back in the day.
Yeah, I think they stopped publishing as an actual sort of actual magazine. They might have gone. They might still be doing it digitally. I don't know. But they had.
I haven't seen a Pyramid magazine in about 15 years.
Well,
so
there are almost no gaming magazines you see in the stores anymore, anyways. Like
yeah.
White Dwarf and No Quarter are the only two I can think of off the top of my head that I've seen regularly.
Yeah, and White Dwarf has been changed entirely into a miniature catalog.
Right. Dragon and Dungeon magazine went entirely digital for WotC, and so on and so forth. But in one issue, there's an issue of Pyramid I had. I don't know if I still have a copy of it, but it had rules for converting Call of Cthulhu over into GURPS.
Isn't there a whole supplement on that?
Eventually, they published one, yes. But before that, they just had conversion stuff for converting existing Call of Cthulhu stuff into GURPS, which is cool. But I mean, so there are a lot of there are a bunch of old resources for older systems that are out there in places. But the important thing is that back to the whole sort of Eberron to GURPS thing is, you basically look at it and you go, okay, you're not going to be able to translate everything one-to-one. It's just not going to happen because GURPS and D&D are so wildly different mechanically. And you're probably not going to have, you probably won't end up having, magic will probably end up working mechanically very differently. Because in GURPS, magic, the spells are skills. And in D&D, they work very differently.
There's something else entirely, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have the Vancian spellcasting system that earlier editions of D&D had.
Thank God that went away. I hated the Vancian spellcasting.
There are a lot of people who loathe it. There are a lot of people who love it. Again, it's one of those classics. Not everything is for everybody. But
but people who like things I dislike are automatically terrorists. There, I said it. Truth bomb. There is no sarcasm in my voice. There's lots of sarcasm.
So yeah, but you're gonna have there are gonna be some differences here and there. And even if you wanted to capture the flavor of the Vancian casting, you could probably do it in GURPS if you really try. Honestly, it'd be easier to do it in Hero System, weirdly. Just because of the way you build powers and such, which is effectively had in building spells. But yeah, you basically start slapping limitations that you have to pre-memorize the spell. And you can only cast it X number of times. You can only cast it for as many times as you prepared it, etc. And that ends up, there are lots of ways you can do that in Hero System. I think there are ways to do it in GURPS Fantasy also. It's just been so long since I've looked at the GURPS Fantasy books that I don't remember exactly how it works. Because I haven't run GURPS Fantasy in.
I don't think you've ever run GURPS Fantasy, at least not with me.
Oh, I've not run it with you. No.
Because we would have killed everything and then died. Because it's how GURPS Fantasy goes.
Kinda, yeah. GURPS does low fantasy better than it does high fantasy, in my personal opinion. But I do know people run high fantasy in GURPS. I know I ran a GURPS Fantasy game when I was in high school, which is forever and a day ago. Oh God, I want to say it's been since the late '90s, basically. Is the last time I ran Fantasy in GURPS. So yeah, which is why my my knowledge of it is a little bit sketchy. Anywho, trying to think other sort of conversion stuff though. So that's sort of the basics of doing conversion work. Is, as we said, it's mostly focusing on the getting the look and feel of it across. But there will be some mechanical challenges, especially if you're doing something as whole scale as an entire setting. Before we wrap up, though, because we don't have too much longer before our usual hour is up. But I was just sort of thinking, what are some sort of conversions you'd kind of like to see, like game worlds you like, but you don't like the system, and what systems would you think you'd like to convert it to do it?
Let me see here. I would love to see the Fantasy Flight 40K stuff converted to a bell curve system, because I've fallen in love with those completely and utterly.
Yeah. I'm terrible, aren't I? I'm a terrible influence, aren't I?
You really are. It has nothing to do with the fact that I've been playing War Machine for 10 years, and yeah. I've recently fallen completely out of love with all things Games Workshop, except for their awesome flavor.
Right. Yeah, I could totally see doing that, honestly. I'm not sure what system I ended up doing it in.
Yeah, it's the thing. I mean, I'm kind of at a stage right now where I want to convert everything over to IK
I can see that.
because I really enjoy both the career system and the adding and removing of dice mechanics. But I could easily see it done in like GURPS has the right degree of lethality to it.
Right, that's the thing. Is like IK has the career system, which I think is perfect for almost anything Games Workshop related. Honestly,
Yes.
Especially since it has like especially if you're doing like Warhammer Fantasy to Iron Kingdoms.
Yes, Warhammer Fantasy Iron Kingdoms is like so ridiculously plug and play. Honestly,
honestly, if I wanted to run a Warhammer Fantasy game, I would basically just say, okay, we are going to be using Iron Kingdoms with some of the serial numbers filed off because
duh.
Because effectively, the especially some of the older versions. I don't know about the newer version, but the version I futzed around with a little bit when I was in high school, and I tried it and said, I don't like this game mechanically at all.
Yeah, no, I've played Warhammer Fantasy roleplay a few times, and one thing I always hated was the huge amount of careers and the fact that like if you're going strictly as rules by written, you're supposed to roll for the career at random.
Yep.
And fuck that noise, dude.
Yeah, there was almost no control over what your character was beyond I think you got to choose your race, and that was kinda it.
Yeah.
I'm a dwarf. What type of dwarf am I?
Roll some dice.
Yeah, it's like it's a career system where they didn't learn from the very clever way that like if you wanted to do something where like there was like weird branches that you were forced into to sort of establish a backstory so you didn't have to like manually choose each stage of that. Why the hell they didn't handle things the way that Traveler did, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because Traveler for all of Traveler's flaws, most of which are the fact that the game system is old as dirt.
Traveler is another system that I really like the world, but not the system.
Yeah, the system's it's archaic. It's old.
Yeah,
it's just old.
That's a problem.
I mean, but
and Age of War. Oh my God, Age of War. You could reduce the point values on everything to 5%, and it would still make sense. It's so fiddly with its point values that everything is built on 1,000 points. It's like, why?
I don't know. But yeah, but like looking at specifically though, like like converting and there's a reason that there are a boatload of published Traveler supplements for GURPS. Because it's like, oh, you want to do a fairly hard sci-fi game in a system that is actually fully functional and robust. We have GURPS here, and we've made deals with the original publishers, the original writers of the world, to adapt the stuff to GURPS. Done.
Yeah.
Like honestly, the one thing I will say this though, I mean, like Mongoose Games did republish Traveler, and it's the old rules basically still exist, and I'm not sure how much I like the system, but I really enjoy rolling up characters in it. It's actually a lot of fun.
There is something to be said about that. Yeah,
it's actually kind of a mini game in its own way because you basically it's fun sort of saying, okay, I start with this. These are my open starting stats because it's got randomly generated stats because it's a system that came out in the early '80s.
Yeah,
that isn't the James Bond 007 role playing game. I still can't believe that game came out in '83 as an entirely point based system.
Yeah, how weird is that? Seriously.
Like, admittedly, Champions existed at the same time also. Like, the original Champions came out in, like, 81 or 82. But, like, and that's something that, like, blows some people's minds. They realize, wait, Champions have been around that long? Yeah, it has. But, yeah, James Bond 007 role-playing game, you look at it and you go, wait a minute. Why? This system was so ahead of its time. It's got flaws, but yeah, so, like, in Traveler, you got this whole thing where you basically, you get your starting stats, and you basically, okay, this is the career I want my character to start off with. And you basically, I think the first career you have to make for some of them require a die roll to get into it. You have to qualify for it, basically. Or actually, no, the first one you actually just get, I think. Unless it's like a particular, and you make some die rolls, see what happened during that time in that career, which give you some skill bonuses or etc. Like like major events in your life during that period, and then you roll to see if you get cashiered out of that career for various reasons. For some of them, like if it turns out you're really not qualified to be a Marine. Like some of them, you have to make a die roll to get into. It's like, okay, I want to my first career, I want to start off as a Marine. Well, are your stats even remotely capable of supporting the fact that you're a Marine? Not really. Well, there's a chance they'll accept you. Ah, you succeeded. Great. How do things go while you're in there? Not very well. Okay. Do you get to stay in the Marines? Nope. You're no longer a Marine. They say, yep, bye. You served your tour of duty. Don't come back. You're just not cut out for this job, kid. And so on and so forth. And then it's an interesting sort of. It's really interesting seeing how that sort of goes. And you end up with some really interesting characters doing that. And there's some of the career choices you automatically get into and can automatically stay in. Like
Drifter.
Drifter, yeah, that's one of the big ones.
Drifter was like my default. I need something in between these two careers. I will do Drifter.
Or if your social stats high enough, you can automatically qualify for Noble.
Yeah.
Which I missed actually one of the characters of rolling up because I had a ridiculously high social stat and failed my role, so I went to become an entertainer and ended up with Space David Bowie. So there's that. And I know, Eric, every David Bowie is Space David Bowie.
Yeah.
Because David Bowie is from space.
He is.
But yeah, honestly, I agree with you. I think both the Warhammer worlds, assuming you want to roleplay in them. I personally don't. I if I had the choice between Warhammer Fantasy World and almost any other fantasy world, I'll take the almost any other fantasy world 9 times out of 10.
I could see that.
There
could totally see having a lot of fun doing a paranoia type game in a Skaven Warren. That could be a ridiculous amount of fun.
I could see that. Wouldn't be my cup of tea, but I can see it. But honestly, if I had to choose between game worlds I want to role playing in, the Warhammer Fantasy World or the Iron Kingdoms world, it's not even a choice for me. I think
I'll agree. The Iron Kingdoms world it's got steam powered robots, man.
But if you want to even stick without the steampunk stuff, okay, so instead of that, we've got Warhammer Fantasy the Warhammer Fantasy World and Greyhawk. As boring and generic as vanilla as Greyhawk is, I'll take it. I just don't I personally am not a fan of the Warhammer Fantasy World for role playing. It's there's a lot about it I just don't like. I think it's a great wargame world.
Okay, cool. We can agree to disagree.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's a fun world to play in.
My problem with it is honestly, my big problem with it is, and this is just a personal thing, is there's just nobody I actually like. I like them from a wargaming standpoint. I think they're outside. I guess I could sort of see wanting to play a dwarf.
Yeah, dwarves are cool.
But
my biggest problem with Warhammer Fantasy is all the races I'd be interested in playing in are clearly chaos tainted evil.
Yep. I don't play bad guys generally, and the most interesting races in Warhammer Fantasy are the evil races.
They really are.
And even then, the Empire. The Empire's okay, but kind of dull. Bretonnia, no. Fuck the fantasy battle elves, all of them.
Yeah, fuck those guys. Every one of them, and even the Dark Elves, which are at least hey, we're evil and we're pretty open.
Screw those guys too. I mean, come on. They're assholes.
Yeah,
all of them.
They're all assholes.
I'm
a wood elf. I'm a xenophobic psychopath.
Oh wait, I am actually forgetting one. I can't remember the name of it. The humans off to the north.
Kislev.
Kislev.
Russia.
They're not bad. I actually kind of like Kislev.
Actually, yeah, not Russia is pretty cool. I'll give not Russia
Like,
a pass.
I want to like the Empire because I love their aesthetic. There's a lot of cool things about
Mustaches, such muddy mustaches.
them, and they have this sort of cool Prussian vibe to them.
Yeah,
And then they just sort of,
and they never grew out of the Spanish Inquisition.
yeah, that's the problem. They're jerks. I mean, even the dwarves are jerks, but they're at least sort of jerks in a surly and amusing way.
Hey, orcs are cool.
I just
No,
can't.
I understand.
I like orcs. I think orcs are cool, but I can't envision playing a GW orc.
Oh, I can. I have. It's lots of fun.
I know you have, and it's way more up your alley than mine.
I do think that they work best in contrast to someone playing someone much more knobbish.
Yeah.
Not knob like in the 40k orc kind of way, but in like the particularly infuriating noble kind of way.
Yeah. So, like, honestly, their best counterpoint for a fantasy battle orc would be a high elf, but that will never happen.
Unless they're both stuck on a desert island together, and then they'll just murder one another.
One of them will have killed the other one eventually, pretty quickly.
And then probably eaten them.
Yeah. Well, assuming the orc wins, which they're not, depending on what the elf is, they're not bad odds of it.
Yeah. Well, the elf might eat him just because the orc's not a person and there's no food there. Because high elves are jerks in fantasy.
Oh, they're assholes. They really are. As I said, basically everybody's an asshole because it's a war game, and it makes the war game work. It means that everybody's in conflict.
Yeah, it means that everyone has a reason to hate each other, which means there's always a good reason to punch one another.
Right, and that's great. I actually see it much easier. I see a much easier time playing in the 40k universe just because it's bigger.
Yeah.
And there are more places you can have sort of things that are not strictly typical of the 40k. Like a game set entirely in like a hive city would be kind of interesting.
Both of the 40k universe 40k games I played in, Dark Heresy and Rogue Trader, got around the general don't rock the boat attitude of the Imperium of Mankind by having you play as an Inquisitor's Retinue, or actual like Rogue Traders whose job it is to say, fuck you Imperium, I'm going to go do my own thing, and come back with all sorts of treasure.
Right. So yeah, I think I could definitely see using any number of systems to do a 40k game, and that was not the Fantasy Flight game. Assuming you don't like the Fantasy Flight game, I don't know enough about it to say anything either way.
It's percentage based, and my biggest problem with it is that you need modifiers to get anything done.
Right.
But like your average roll, say average shot in combat, you shooting at someone in the open, you get like plus 20 to it, which means you're going to be hitting, well, depending on what your ballistic skill is, you'll be hitting somewhere between 50 and 70% of the time.
Right. Yeah, I remember that from the one time that sounds similar to the way it was in the old Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game.
Yes, they draw a lot of parallels.
A starting character in that was like, most starting characters end up with like at best a 40% chance to hit with like their basic attacks without any modifiers.
Yeah.
Which I looked at, I'm like, wow, you suck to start with.
Yes.
And I remember
that's my biggest problem with the system.
I remember getting into an argument with a friend of mine about that. They were like, no, you're badass compared to everybody else, but you still suck.
Yeah.
Combat's going to be just this constant stream of failure after failure after failure until you finally succeed. Which means,
and that's my biggest problem with it. I like the worlds. I like how they manage to get the feel of things with the mechanics, but like, yeah, I don't want to have to rely on modifiers to get anything done.
Yeah, and
I think at that point you should bump up everyone's abilities and remove the more common modifiers.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, so shooting someone who's not moving the open is plus 20%. So why isn't the default to hit chance 20% higher?
Yeah. I
mean, that really is one of those. Wait, what?
And that's exactly my problem with it.
That really is a wait. What? Why did you make that design decision? What on earth were you? Never mind. Say, I could easily see it translating to something like mechanically like Iron Kingdom, so that'd be a lot more work than Fantasy Battle, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Honestly, my
Yeah.
gut feeling is I would probably end up trying to do it in Hero, honestly.
Mm.
And not GURPS, because Hero does sort of that sort of cinematic, weird and wackiness better than GURPS does, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. I could see that.
Or you could do, I guess you could do it in something like, I mean, there are a bunch of systems you could do it in. But yeah, I definitely could see that. For me, game worlds that are stuck in systems I don't like that I want to see adapted, that I'd like to see in some other system. Honestly, Exalted.
Yeah.
I think it's a great game world. I'd love to see it in an actual, honest-to-God role-playing game system, not White Wolf.
As long as I get to play Lunar, so I can be a crazy shape changer that eats hearts.
Okay.
Dude, that's all I want to do.
I will say this: if I ever ran an Exalted game, if I was running default Exalted, you wouldn't have the opportunity to play a Lunar, because I don't own the book for that,
Right.
and I'm not going to buy it because I'm not shelling out $50 or whatever it is for
Something, whatever ridiculous price, yeah.
No, not happening again. Not happening. And if I was going to do it in, I'll say this: I'm not willing to do the conversion work to convert it over, because there'd be a lot of conversion work I'd have to do for some of the things in it to do in Hero, but it could be done.
Yeah.
So yeah. Actually, I know how I'd end up doing it in Hero, but
I know how I ended up doing it. Congratulations, Feng Shui.
well, that's the easiest way to do it. Yes. I agree completely, but part of me would want to do it in Hero. I don't know why. Actually, I know why, because I would want to try to keep all the charms that the abilities that the Exalted get. They're called charms,
Right.
and they all have their own unique sort of mechanic and flavor to them, and all of them are buildable in Hero system.
It's because you can build anything in Hero System.
Exactly, and a lot of them wouldn't translate well into Feng Shui. Is the problem.
Yeah, I guess so.
So that's why I want to do it in Hero. But anyways, honestly, Exalted is way up on my list of things I'd love to see in a system that I actually like.
I had actually forgotten Exalted existed, so I never actually played it as part of the reason.
I've played it once, but I own some of the books, and I think it's a cool game world. Minus the you are completely fucking doomed.
I'd love to give Deadlands a shot at some point.
That's another one I think I would like to translate to another system. Although I will say this: Savage Worlds is a better it is both beneficial and unfortunate that they made the transition to Savage Lands, Savage Worlds, not Savage Lands, Savage Worlds, from the original Deadlands rules, because the original Deadlands rules, while they were flawed, had some really cool concepts.
Yeah, like the whole idea of like poker chips and whatnot.
Right, and like, a lot of the random mechanics were done with,
A deck of cards.
deck of cards. I think it's really cool. But it was a flawed system, unfortunately.
Yeah. Lots of style, not a lot of function.
Yeah, that's sort of its big problem. And there are a bunch of games that are like that. It's like, okay, wow, there's a lot of cool flavor there, but why are you doing it this way? I think part of the problem is a lot of game designers have this happen to them, and I'm not immune to that in some of the games I've fiddled with on my own, sort of my own design. Is they start with when they're building the system, the actual mechanics of the system, they start with the fluff and sort of try to reverse engineer the system to fit the fluff, and or more specifically, actually that's sometimes a problem. That usually isn't the big problem. The problem is sometimes they got a cool mechanic that feels fluffy to the system and won't let go of it.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't turn out to work.
And I can totally understand that.
I understand it completely. It's so hard to give up your baby, especially if it's something that you think is really cool. Yeah. So, I think that is... But yeah, that's I would say Deadlands is up on my list also. I agree with you completely, Eric.
Yeah, I would say I'd like to see it in a different system, but I haven't played either basic Deadlands or Savage Worlds.
Yeah,
So, like, get a game under my belt, then start thinking about other systems.
Yeah. Most of the other ones, most of the other game worlds I really like, I actually kind of like the systems they're tied to for the most part.
Yeah.
Actually, there's one other game world I'd like to see in a other game world. I'd like to see a system that I like.
What's that?
Sorry, there are two. One is Star Wars. I would like to see Star Wars in a system that I think actually, gets the feel of Star Wars, and B is fully functional and isn't needlessly fiddly.
I haven't played the Age of the Empires, but the wacky proprietary dice that Fantasy Flight is so fond of, it's a huge turnoff for me.
It's a deal breaker for me personally.
It's a huge turnoff.
And the other is Star Trek, because there's not been a good Star Trek role-playing game ever.
Yeah. No, I will totally agree with that. If there were, I would so be playing a Klingon.
And honestly...
Not like some kind of, like, stuck up my ass, all about honor kind of Worf-type Klingon. No, I'm going to be a cool Klingon. Like Kang.
I don't know. There are a bunch of Klingons. There's so many different ways to be a Klingon. Is the cool thing about that? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
Like, Worf is a great Klingon. Kang is a great Klingon. Gowron is a great Klingon. Martok is a great Klingon.
Martok's my boy.
I can't imagine why. Oh God, but yeah, I would love to see that. Honestly, doing Star Trek in like either GURPS or Hero would be dead easy.
Yeah,
it's easier than doing as long as you're not trying to worry about starship combat, because
yeah,
that's always tricky. But honestly, I look at them like I'm not sure I want to run a Star Trek game. Is my problem. I'd love to play one.
Yeah, that's sort of my problem too.
Like
because I know what I'd want to play in a Star Trek game, assuming it's Federation, because everything is defaults to Federation. I would love to play a Klingon exchange officer.
Absolutely, it'd be great.
I think there'd be lots of fun coming from the Klingon Defense Force and having to deal with all the Starfleet regulations, and this doesn't make any sense. Why don't your redundancies actually work?
Yeah, I think,
Why do you rely so heavily on the structural integrity field? Why don't you just build your hulls proper?
So, yeah, I that's one of those things and I honestly think I could, I'm certain if I wanted to spend the time on it, I could easily get like the package deals and all that sort of set up for the races in Hero System for Star Trek. It'd be dead easy.
Yeah. It would actually be really awesome playing that Klingon alongside a Vulcan and just have the two of them become best friends.
Oh, absolutely.
Just totally do a Bones and Spock thing would be great.
Yeah, it'd be great. Things to add to the list of things I would love to do, but probably never will.
Yeah.
Anywho, I think that's going to do it for this week, though. Thanks for watching, guys. We try to save time at the end of each show for answering viewer questions. This week's episode was entirely inspired by a viewer question, so...
Yeah, sometimes you get a whole episode dedicated to them.
And if you have viewer questions that you'd like answered on the show, you can email them to us. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com, surlygrognards@yahoo.com. Or you can post them on our forums, which you can find at mechagm.forumer.com. If you've got feedback for us, ways we can make the show better, we love getting that. Or if things we've talked about that you think would be interesting to revisit, that sort of stuff we love hearing, especially the constructive criticism.
Yes.
Show topic suggestions, which sort of falls in that little bit I said there before, but if there are things you'd like us to revisit, or just entirely, like an entire show that you think we've not done before.
Yeah, because there are times where we go, so have we done this? Have we done an episode about this? Yes. Have we done an episode about this? Yes. Well, I'm out of ideas.
Yeah.
That was last week.
That was last week. But yeah, honestly, that's the thing is, if there's something we've talked about in the show before, and there's something we didn't talk about when we were doing that, let us know.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear that. And even if we don't do a whole show about it, we might dedicate a part of a show to that. If we get enough of them, we might sort of go, things we missed in previous shows.
Yeah.
Episodes. Things like that. We love getting show topic suggestions, because we do this. Part of the reason to do the show is to, do we do this for you guys? And so knowing what you guys want to hear us talk about is a big help.
It also gives me an excuse to drink on a Monday night.
Oh God. So yeah. And all that jazz. We record the show every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern here on twitch.tv/MechaGM. I post a link on my Twitter when we're about to go live. So keep an eye on that. My Twitter handle is @MechaGM. If you're listening to the recording of this on YouTube, hit like and subscribe. If you've got questions or anything like that, you can post them in the comment section there too if you'd like. I do keep an eye on that. Other than that, thanks for watching, guys. We hope you all had fun. And for those of you who are watching live, the YouTube account is it's youtube.com/MechaGM. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with some full topic where we'll talk about something or other and probably ramble about things that have nothing to do with it, because it's us. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys soon. Until we see you guys next, be happy, be safe, keep on gaming, and take care. Have a good night, guys.
Bye, humans.